welcome to our little tale of woe, triumph against impossible odds, terror, and managerly responsibility. Our story begins in the calm waters above the town of Bikini Bottom. As we descend beneath the waves, we find another day. Wait a minute! Hold your seahorses!
Who here remembers a little Nickelodeon cartoon called SpongeBob SquarePants?
SpongeBob is iconic. One of, if not the most famous animated character of all time. And with success comes video games. We've got some truly delectable jank, like Legend of the Lost Spatula for Game Boy Color.
Christ.
However, it's pretty famously known that in the sea of mediocre to bad games out there, the Absorbent One has had one exemplar in his gaming legacy. Battle for Bikini Bottom, released on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube in 2003. While I'm definitely going to get more into detail on that later on, all you need to know for now is that it's a pseudo-open world 3D platformer. The real story begins a year later. Picture this. The year is 2004. SpongeBob had reached its peak as an art form, nearly universally beloved. The creator, Stephen Hillenburg, seeing the writing on the wall, decides to bring his series to a close with a big bang of a movie. One last, huge story to give his characters and world the fond farewell they deserve. And say what you will about the first SpongeBob movie, but there's a beautiful sense of closure that came with it that really left you feeling all warm and cozy inside. Ocean Man alone is a testament to that.
Would you believe me if I told you I never saw this movie beginning to end in its entirety before? Yeah, growing up, it was one of those things where catching a broadcast of it was very rare. And then, on the summer vacation between high school and college, I saw the DVD for a cheap price, picked it up, and enjoyed it. But that's not what I want to talk about today. No, the disc I want to talk about is this.
The SpongeBob SquarePants movie game is really something special. This was number 3 in my big gaming trifecta, and this was the one that shaped my standards for gaming going forward.
Please don't take me seriously, the feds certainly don't.
This game, like its predecessor, is also a pseudo-open-world 3D platformer in the vein of Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie, the only caveat being that there isn't a hub world to travel through in between levels, so as a result, the pacing ends up being kinda weird. As a rule of thumb, this guy follows the plot of the movie kinda loosely at best. There are a couple of fun in-engine cutscenes to continue the story of the individual levels along, but when it transitions between the levels to tell the story of the movie, there are a bunch of slideshow images with clip art on them. On the bright side of that, though, the iconic French narrator serenades you with his harmonious accent, so it's not all bad. Bizarrely, though, while the vast majority of the voice cast reprised their role from the movie, including Scarlett Johansson as Mindy, strangely, Alec Baldwin doesn't return as Dennis. Most of his lines from the film are redubbed for these cutscenes. All of this is to say, up until fairly recently, this was how I thought the movie played out. I know, all of my Tinder matches suddenly evaporated, just like my ex-wife. But for those of you not in the know, the story revolves around SpongeBob and Patrick trying to recover King Neptune's crown from the mysterious Shell City and save Mr. Krabs. All while Plankton, the series' main antagonist, starts turning everybody in Bikini Bottom into mind-controlled servants to take over the world, having framed Mr. Krabs for stealing King Neptune's crown, freezing him so he could steal the Krabby Patty formula. It's a fairly straightforward plot, features all the important beats you need, and the game does adapt some of them, just not everything. But considering you're turning an 87-minute movie into a 6-hour video game, some details will have to be reprioritized for the sake of flow, I suppose. Let's ditch the presentation for a while and get into the meat and potatoes of the game, the gameplay. There are 2 distinct gameplay styles, and both of them are divided into 2 separate categories. First and foremost, we've got general 3D platforming as SpongeBob and Patrick, the dynamic duo of men. They play very similarly, but there's a few interesting quirks to each. Contrary to their appearances, SpongeBob is more angled towards combat and Patrick leans more into exploration. They both have a bevy of upgradable abilities that you unlock over the course of the game, and I honestly don't know how to feel about them. Some of them, such as Patrick's faster cartwheel or both of them being given spin attacks that reflect projectiles, are borderline necessary, but on the other hand, SpongeBob's upgraded air bash attack and Patrick's upgraded throw ability are actively harmful. They cost a significant amount of time to charge up, and the basic move is usually better. This isn't a ton of depth, but it is a lot more than I remember there being, so good work, Spongeville. Good work. The platforming levels make up the vast majority of the game, and they're all pretty solid. At least the critical path is. Each level has a few side objectives within, usually somewhere between 4 or 6 tasks to complete in each, which vary wildly in type. You've got combat arena challenges, which are gauntlets of 120 enemies that progressively get harder the further you get into the game. You've got sponge ball levels, which are obstacle courses that take place in these liminal spaces. They're far from difficult, but a word of warning, don't try to center the camera behind Spingleblab here if you value your lunch. After this, you've got some moving block puzzles with Patrick. These are a bit rough because the camera in them is super finicky. Not impossible by any stretch of the imagination, but they have somewhat strict time limits, and on one in particular, the background gets replaced with a spinning block that damn near burned my retinas. This one is awful, skip it if you can. Other than that, we've got bungee challenges for SpongeBob, which I remember being a lot more difficult than they actually are, and some simplistic platforming challenges here and there, along with throw fruit puzzles for Patrick. Again, simplistic and kind of fun. Perfect for a kids game. On the other hand, there are the driving levels. These are pretty awful, but not for the reasons that you might think. The paddy wagon driving levels are actually pretty straightforward, with each of them having a different spin to them. The first one, Sandwich Driving 101, is an introductory level. Pretty simple, but giving you plenty of opportunities to see what the paddy wagon is capable of. No Weenie Parking Anytime has you run around the Thug Tug parking lot collecting keys to escape. Sunday Driving, a scenario that is completely created for the game, shows SpongeBob and Patrick driving the paddy wagon through a Goofy Goober-themed dream, having to keep up with the Nutmaster himself in order to escape and wake up. And possibly my favorite of these levels, Ride of the Knucklehead McSpazatron, is Sandwich Driving 101 again, but backwards. Driving through this hellscape version of Bikini Bottom, racing to the Krusty Krab 2 to save Mr. Krabs from his doom. On the theoretically improbable third hand, there are sliding levels, which are interesting. Brutal honesty, these kinda suck. They sort of mix the driving levels with the platforming mechanics, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but a lot of the time you just stop dead in your tracks without meaning to, and the friction on them just doesn't feel right. These are some of the worst bits of the game, but there's only 3 of them, so I guess it could be worse. All in all, there's a solid variety of activities to keep you busy with, which is good, because periodically, King Neptune's daughter Mindy will check up on you and ask for specific numbers of Goopy Goober tokens to unlock a new ability. This is where the biggest problem with the game comes in. The pacing. So, if you're doing a casual playthrough of the game, the first half of it or so should be pretty smooth sailing. Then you reach the trench in Now That We're Men, and you need 20 tokens for SpongeBob's Sponge Bowl ability. No biggie, just jump back to grab 1 or 2 more tokens, smooth sailing. The very next level, Shell City Dead Ahead, requires 25 tokens. Again, not the hardest trick in the book, because you had 20 for the last one, and there's at least 5 different tokens in Now That We're Men, so there you go. After this, you go through a couple of boss fights, a slide level, and a racing level. If you did nothing but the bare minimum throughout this point, then you'll hit the next platforming level, Welcome to Planktopolis Minions, with 30 tokens. Good to go, right? Nope. For some reason that I just don't understand, SpongeBob's final power-up, the Sonic Wave Guitar, requires 40 tokens. Go back and grab 10 more, dillweed. But wait, you're not done, because the next level after this requires 50 tokens to access the end of the game. That's where the Sonic Wave Guitar comes in. Go back through a few levels, do the Sonic Wave Guitar challenges, and come back to finish everything. But that alone won't do it. Oh, no. Now is the time to get to the worst part of this game. The time trials. Every driving and sliding stage has 3 different varieties of time trial to them, and you're gonna have to do at least a few of these if you want to get through this game. The first time trial is the easiest, naturally. There's a decent enough margin of error in these, and you can usually get a good lay of the land to figure out the fastest way to go about it. The ring challenges, on the other hand, are painful. The Sonic Wave Guitar challenges are also ring challenges, so I guess I'll lump them all together here and give you the bare minimum. So, a series of rings is placed one after another on each of the tracks, and already there is a problem. These rings have kind of messy collision detection, and if they're any distance above the ground, you have to hit the interior of the ring no matter what. The bottom just doesn't count for some reason. There are also a surprising number of scenarios where the ring just materializes ever so slightly out of your view, and turning the camera can be difficult. This goes doubly so in the Sonic Wave Guitar Challenge levels, because on top of a rather rude camera, the thing controls like ass, and let me tell you, around these parts, that doesn't control well. Regardless, if you do manage to pull this off, you have one last time trial, and these are tough. One in particular, I crossed the finish line with the exact amount of time you had to do it. Nope, do it again.
You fool.
I will give it this. There is a certain enamoring quality to these levels that kept me coming back for a few attempts. It just sucks that the ring challenges come first, and at least one or two of these will end up being mandatory depending on how much you want to engage with the harder platforming.
Alright, I know that was a lot of complaining to get out of the way, but please just bear with me. This was one of my favorite games growing up. I have to try to be objective here. That being said, let's move on to the good stuff.
The level design for this game is really good for what it is. They are linear, that's to be sure, but there's a decent amount of exploration to do with branching paths or separated challenges on their own little teleporter pads. The thing that really makes this game so cool and unique from Battle for Bikini Bottom is the theming of the levels. So many different stages here go all out with the ideas that they present. The only dud in my opinion is 3,000 miles to Shell City, but even then it works because the idea is to have a massive desolate desert stretching out in front of Spring Roll and Rick Sanchez, so even that works. The first real level, I'm Ready, Depression, aside from its awesome title, is a great introductory level, teaching the general mechanics of Patrick's playstyle between his cartwheeling and tongue swinging. Going through this massive interior of goofy goobers just results in this ending up being the closest you'll ever get to playing through Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory in a video game. Sorry, Deep Roy. Bubble Blowing Baby Hunt is fun for fleshing out the Thug Tug, which was only a short momentary scene in the movie, but it turns into a really challenging level with purposefully tough and plentiful enemies. But it also derails into absolute bananas territory with Disco Star. Take a quick turn where you really shouldn't, and you'll end up in a bizarrely pulp-inspired quest where Patrick is jumping between lighting up dance floors and electrical wires while clubbers are watching in the background. I particularly love this thing because of the sort of leopard print rugs on the ground and the absolutely boppin' disco music playing. This is the most bizarrely juxtaposed moment in the entire game and deserves to be savored like the treat that it is. Now That We're Men is more or less the halfway point of the game, and I'm inclined to say that it's also the peak. The trench is dank and disturbing with alien-esque enemies all over and giant monsters at every turn. Sure, the game does skip right on through the events of the trench trek and more importantly, the song, but it does do a really good job showing off just how thoroughly messed up this place really is. Arguably even better than the movie does. If there's any level in this game that deserves to be talked about more, it's this one. Especially considering, now that they're men, they have facial hair. Patrick's underwear? Shell City Dead Ahead, Patrick's final main level, is a really fun idea. Plankton is using televisions in the trench to convince the fish down there to follow his orders. There was already a Plankton propaganda thing going on in the desert, but honestly, this is more fun because throwing a watermelon into a TV to shatter it feels a hell of a lot more cathartic than hitting a button to cause an explosion. In any case, the throw fruit abilities have their issues, namely you can't jump while holding anything. Sure, I guess it makes sense, but it's still kinda dumb. The only other interesting note here is that there's a mission that's a reference to a nuclear disaster in this level. It's pretty random too. Sure, you're climbing up some platforms with water coming up from underneath and you're in a tunnel, but it's not more complex than that. Although if this level's theming was also a reference to the nuclear testing that happened in the Bikini Atoll, we might be getting somewhere. Speaking of disasters, welcome to Planktopolis, minions. This is also a very bizarrely out-of-place level. In the movie, SpongeGar and Pat Tar went directly from David Hasselhoff's cleavage to the Krusty Krab 2, and they never go through the town at all. This level also is bizarrely not an asset flip of Downtown Bikini Bottom from Battle for Bikini Bottom, even though that would be the obvious thing to do. They just added the scene in the game because the atmosphere said they could. Well done, Heavy Iron Studios. Jolly good show. That being said, this level kinda sucks, and not just because of the bizarrely heavy cost of entry. The first 3/4 of the level are solid. You even have a couple of Patrick quests relying on his swinging and throw fruit ability, so he gets some action before the big finale. The part I was dreading the most about this place was the reliance of forward wall jumping it requires towards the middle of the level. But surprisingly, I barely had any trouble with it. No, the big problem here was the ending, which is a gauntlet of a bunch of enemies that consistently fire projectiles at you. And I hope you upgraded SpongeBob's spin attack because you can't get close to these guys or they'll laser you, and you can't use the Sonic Wave guitar because you're on a series of conveyor belts. There are some hard parts of this game, but this, by far, is the worst thing that you have to do outside of the ring challenges. Once you get through that, here, have a bizarre cutscene showing off Plankton holding something with his butt cheeks.
I had to see it, now all of you do too.
Something kind of weird about Plankton is that he has hands in this game, and upon looking into it, he apparently also does in the movie proper. Bizarre decision, to be sure. Anyway, the last level before the final boss is Sandwich Driving 101, but backwards, as I have already stated. You need to get from the edge of Bikini Bottom back to the Krusty Krab 2, with all sorts of debris and madness falling in your wake. It's a nifty little bookend to the journey and sets the stage beautifully for the final boss fight. On that note, I forgot to talk about the boss fights. They're here. The first two you play as Patrick, the other two you play as SpongeBob. Patrick fights the frogfish from the ice cream stand scene, and they both fight Dennis once each. Patrick does in the trench, and SpongeBob does on David Hasselhoff's back. Something kind of funny about this fight in particular, while I was doing it, I got about halfway through Dennis's health bar, and the game just glitched out, giving me the win. Considering how much trouble I had with him in the Patrick fight, I'm gonna call this penance on the game's part. The final boss, though? That's a different story. You're fighting a mind-controlled King Neptune, and you have to hit him with guitar blasts to save him. Slight issue though, for the most part, he's invincible. So turn the tables in the Krusty Krab so his energy beams will reflect back at him, using Eugene Armorab's Krab's frozen body as a mirror to draw his fire. Now, many of my constituents may have noted that this fight is rather long, and it kind of is. See, the big issue with it is that you need to perfectly dodge 3 of Neptune's attacks in a row before he fires his laser, and if you get hit by any of them, the counter resets. But with enough patience and perseverance, you can get through it. About halfway through, Neptune annihilates half of the floor, resulting in an even greater platforming challenge. 2 more henchmen appear and start firing on SpongeBob, the music hits, in that perfect moment, with the Goofy Goober Rock kicking in to send the game off in style, and after a couple more blasts to the noggin, Neptune is freed, and the day is won. One final cutscene and you're spat back to the first level with a slightly anticlimactic sense of completion.
And that was the SpongeBob SquarePants movie game. All in all, this game is far from perfect, but I'd say it's pretty darn great. Sure, pacing issues certainly do bog it down a bit, but if it's about the journey rather than the destination, and the destination is mediocre at best, does a high barrier of entry really make that destination worse? This humble viewer says no. That being said, if you have any interest in this, it's no Mario Sunshine or even a modern day thing like A Hat in Time, but if you have fun with 3D platformers, this is gonna be your guide. Give it a shot, try something new, you might even find a new classic. Now if you'll excuse me, I have to go get my watch repaired.
Now go outside and get some sun. You look awful pale.